In the 20th episode of the first season of Avatar: The Last Airbender, a Fire Nation admiral named Zhao captures the Avatar, a 12-year-old boy named Aang, and chains him to a pillar in a fortress. Zhao has spent the entire season hunting this boy. He has diverted military resources, risked his career, and antagonized his own chain of command to capture the last Airbender alive. And now he has him. The boy is unconscious, restrained, defenseless. One blast of fire, one command to a guard, one decision made in the privacy of a locked room. And the greatest threat to the Fire Nation's century-long campaign of global domination is gone. Zhao does not kill him. He explains why. If the Avatar is killed, he will simply be reborn into the next nation in the cycle, and the Fire Nation will have to start the hunt all over again with no idea where the new Avatar is or who the new Avatar is. Better to keep him alive and imprisoned forever. The logic sounds reasonable for about 3 seconds. Then it collapses, because the next nation in the cycle is the Water Tribe, which means the new Avatar would be born as a Water Tribe infant. An infant who cannot bend. An infant who will not be able to walk for a year, speak coherently for 2, and begin any kind of bending training for at least 4 or 5. Sozin's Comet, the celestial event that will grant the Fire Nation the power to end the war permanently, arrives in less than 2 years. By the time the new Avatar could hold a spoon, the war would be over. If this is the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about at this hour, subscribing helps us keep making these. It is free and takes a moment. And there is an even deeper problem, one the show never acknowledges. The Avatar must master all 4 elements. The Avatar cycle goes water, earth, fire, air. A Water Tribe Avatar would need to learn airbending, and there are no airbenders left. The Fire Nation killed them all. The new Avatar would be permanently incomplete, unable to ever achieve the full Avatar state, unable to ever access the power that makes the Avatar a threat in the first place. Killing Aang would not just remove the current threat, it would cripple every future Avatar for as long as the air nomad culture remained extinct. That is a plot hole, not a small one, not the kind you can explain away with a generous reading or a fan theory. It is a structural crack in the foundation of the first season's central conflict. And it is, in a way, the master key that unlocks all the other plot holes in the series. Because here is the thing about Zhao's logic. The show knows it does not hold up. The show abandons it almost immediately. In Season 2, Azula actively tries to kill Aang. She shoots him with lightning. She does not capture him for indefinite detention. She aims to end him, and the show never addresses the contradiction. Zhao's reasoning, which was presented as sound military strategy in Season 1, is silently discarded in Season 2. And no character ever explains why the Fire Nation's official position on the Avatar changed from keep him alive at all costs to kill him if you can. The most likely explanation is that the writers realized the logical problem between seasons and quietly corrected course. But the correction created a new inconsistency, because if killing the Avatar was always an option, then Zhao's entire strategy was wrong from the start, and the first season's central tension was built on a premise that the show itself did not believe by the time the second season began. This is not unusual in serialized television. Shows evolve. Rules established in early seasons are refined, reinterpreted, or quietly abandoned as the writers develop a deeper understanding of their own world. But Avatar presents itself as a single, unified narrative, not a show that was figured out season by season. And the gap between Zhao's reasoning and Azula's actions is one of the first signs that the show's internal consistency, while remarkable, is not absolute. There is one more wrinkle to the Zhao problem that is rarely discussed. Zhao is presented as an ambitious, intelligent military commander. He has access to the Fire Nation's vast intelligence apparatus. He has access to Wan Shitong's library, which he visited before the events of the show and where he learned about the moon and ocean spirits. He is a scholar as well as a soldier, and yet his reasoning about the Avatar cycle is wrong in ways that a child could identify. A man who was smart enough to find the spirit library, smart enough to learn about the moon spirit, smart enough to plan and execute an invasion of the Northern Water Tribe, was apparently not smart enough to calculate the age of a hypothetical reborn Avatar and compare it to the timeline of the war. This suggests one of 2 things. Either Zhao is not as smart as the show presents him, in which case his threat level has been artificially inflated by the narrative, or Zhao's reasoning is motivated. He does not want to kill Aang because killing Aang would remove his leverage. A living Avatar is a political tool, a trophy, proof of Zhao's importance to the Fire Nation's military hierarchy. Zhao does not want Aang dead. He wants Aang in chains, in a cell, as evidence of Zhao's personal triumph. Because Zhao's ambition is not about the war. It is about Zhao. And the reasoning he gives, the reincarnation argument, is a rationalization for a decision he has already made based on ego rather than strategy. This reading makes Zhao a more interesting character and a more coherent villain, but it is not the reading the show offers. The show takes Zhao's reasoning at face value. It presents the reincarnation argument as sound military logic, and by doing so, it undermines its own villain's intelligence and creates a plot hole that could have been avoided by simply adding one line of dialogue, where another character challenges Zhao's logic and Zhao reveals his true motivation. These are the first of 10 fractures we are going to walk through tonight. Some of them are small, the kind that only matter if you are paying very close attention. Some of them are enormous, the kind that reshape how you understand the entire show once you see them. All of them are worth examining, not because finding flaws in a beloved show is the point, but because the flaws themselves are interesting. Because a perfect show is a closed system, a finished object that you admire from the outside. A flawed show is an open one, an invitation to think, to argue, to sit with the contradiction and let it teach you something about how stories work and why they sometimes fail to do what they're trying to do. Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the greatest animated shows ever made. That is not a controversial statement. It is a consensus. The show's character development, its world building, its emotional depth, its willingness to treat children's storytelling with the same seriousness that prestige dramas treat adult storytelling, all of these qualities have earned it a reputation that has only grown in the nearly 2 decades since it ended. And it is precisely because the show is so good, because it set its standards so high, because it asked to be taken seriously as a work of narrative art, that its plot holes are worth examining. A mediocre show with plot holes is just a mediocre show. A great show with plot holes is a great show that tried to do something extraordinarily difficult and did not quite succeed in every dimension. And the places where it did not succeed are the most interesting places to look, because the places where a story breaks are often the places where the story is trying hardest to do something ambitious. And the ambition matters more than the breakage. Now, let us begin with the first and perhaps the most troubling of these fractures. And as we move through them, from the 1st to the 10th, you might notice a pattern. The plot holes in Avatar: The Last Airbender are not random failures. They are not lazy writing or careless mistakes. They are, almost without exception, the result of the show trying to do 2 things at once and failing to reconcile them. Trying to be a children's show and an adult drama. Trying to honor real-world physics and maintain a fantasy world. Trying to tell a complete story within 3 seasons of 20-minute episodes, and also leaving room for the mystery and ambiguity that great storytelling requires. The tension between these competing goals is where the cracks appear. And the cracks, as Leonard Cohen once wrote in a different context, are where the light gets in. The genocide of the air nomads is the foundational trauma of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is the event that sets the entire story in motion. Without the genocide, there is no frozen boy in an iceberg, no 100-year war, no journey across the 4 nations, no show. It is the Big Bang of the Avatar universe, the single catastrophic event from which everything else radiates outward. And it does not make sense. The air nomads lived in 4 temples, 2 in mountain ranges so remote and so high that reaching them on foot would be nearly impossible. The northern and southern air temples are perched on peaks that can only be accessed by flying bison, the massive 6-legged creatures that the air nomads bonded with from childhood. The eastern and western air temples are built into cliffs, suspended above valleys so deep that looking down from them would make most people physically ill. These are not locations you march an army to. These are not cities with gates you can besiege. These are fortresses of geography, places where the terrain itself is the defense, and the defenders are the most mobile benders on the planet. Airbenders can fly. Not metaphorically, not with the assistance of technology. They can manipulate the air around them to achieve sustained flight using gliders. And some of the most powerful airbenders, as the show later reveals through Zahir in The Legend of Korra, can fly without any assistance at all. They ride flying bison that can travel hundreds of miles in a day. They live on mountaintops that firebenders cannot climb. They can create hurricanes, tornadoes, vacuum spheres that suffocate enemies, and pressure waves that launch attackers off cliff faces. In a defensive scenario, at altitude, against an enemy that has to climb to reach them, the air nomads should be functionally untouchable. And yet the Fire Nation killed them all, every single one, in a single coordinated strike timed to coincide with Sozin's comet, which amplified firebending to extraordinary levels. The show presents this as a devastating surprise attack, and it expects you to accept that the amplified firebending was enough to overcome every advantage the airbenders possessed. But the math does not work. Sozin's comet makes firebenders more powerful. It does not give them the ability to fly. It does not give them the ability to climb sheer cliff faces. It does not give them resistance to the thin air at extreme altitude, where a firebender's lungs would struggle just as much as anyone else's. And it does not explain how the Fire Nation transported enough soldiers to 4 separate, geographically isolated locations simultaneously without any of the air nomads noticing the largest military mobilization in Fire Nation history and simply flying away. The air nomads had flying bison. They could have evacuated in minutes. They could have scattered to the 4 winds, literally, and reformed somewhere the Fire Nation could never reach. They could have flown to the poles, where the water tribes would have sheltered them. They could have flown to the deep forests of the Earth Kingdom, where no army could follow. They could have flown up, above the clouds, above the reach of any firebender, no matter how comet-enhanced, and waited until the comet passed and the firebenders returned to normal power levels, and then come back. They did not. The show needs them to be dead, all of them, for the story to work. Aang must be the last airbender. The genocide must be total. And so the show asks you to accept that an entire civilization of the most mobile people on the planet, people who could literally fly, were caught on the ground by an army that could not. It asks you to accept that none of them ran, none of them hid, none of them were traveling when the attack happened, out in the world somewhere away from the temples. None of the pregnant women or young mothers with infants too small to ride a bison were visiting relatives in the Earth Kingdom or the water tribes. Every single airbender on the planet was inside a temple at the exact moment the Fire Nation attacked. All 4 temples fell. No survivors. The show offers partial explanations through supplementary material and through the legend of Korra. Sozin may have used the comet's power to create a firestorm so massive that it consumed the mountain oxygen, suffocating the airbenders before they could escape. There may have been Fire Nation soldiers stationed at the base of the mountains for weeks before the comet arrived, cutting off ground escape routes. The temples may have been infiltrated by spies who disabled defenses or poisoned water supplies. But none of these explanations appear in the original show. In the original show, the genocide is simply stated as fact, and the audience is expected to nod and move on. The first great plot hole of Avatar: The Last Airbender is not a minor inconsistency. It is the premise. And the show, to its credit, seems to sense this, because it does something clever with the discomfort. It never lingers on the logistics of the genocide. It never gives you a detailed account of how the attack unfolded. It shows you the aftermath. It shows you the skeletons. It shows you Aang walking through the ruins of the Southern Air Temple and finding the remains of Monk Gyatso, his mentor, surrounded by the bodies of Fire Nation soldiers. Proof that Gyatso fought back, that he took dozens of firebenders with him before he fell. And that image, that single image of an old monk's skeleton surrounded by the armor of his killers, is so powerful, so emotionally devastating, that it accomplishes something remarkable. It makes you forget to ask the question. It makes the grief so real that the logistics become irrelevant. You are not thinking about how the Fire Nation got to the mountain. You are thinking about Aang, a 12-year-old boy, standing in front of the bones of the man who raised him. And the sound he makes when the truth hits him is the sound of a world ending. There is one more thing about the genocide that deserves attention, and it is the detail that haunts the fandom more than any other. Monk Gyatso's body, surrounded by Fire Nation soldiers. The show shows you the aftermath, but not the battle. It lets you see the result, but not the process. And the gap between the result and the process is enormous, because the result implies something that the show cannot say directly. Gyatso killed those soldiers. An air nomad monk, a member of the most pacifist culture in the Avatar world. A man who taught Aang to value all life, killed multiple Fire Nation soldiers during the genocide. The show does not tell you how. It does not describe the technique. It does not explain whether Gyatso used airbending offensively, creating vacuum spheres that suffocated the soldiers, or whether he used some other method. But the bodies are there. The armor is there. The implication is inescapable. Gyatso, in his final moments, became something that his entire culture was designed to prevent. He became a killer. And the show leaves you to sit with that. It does not moralize about it. It does not have a character say, even Gyatso was forced to fight in the end. It simply shows you the bones and lets the bones tell the story. And the story they tell is darker than anything else in the Air Nomad genocide, because it suggests that the genocide was so violent, so overwhelming, so total, that even the most peaceful people in the world were forced to abandon their principles to survive. And even that abandonment was not enough. Gyatso fought, Gyatso killed, and Gyatso still died. The pacifism was not enough. The violence was not enough. Nothing was enough. And the 12-year-old boy who was supposed to protect these people was frozen in an iceberg 1,000 miles away, asleep, safe and completely unaware that everyone he loved was being murdered. That is how good storytelling papers over a plot hole. Not by explaining it, by overwhelming it with emotion so genuine that the explanation becomes unnecessary. And it works. It works so well that most viewers never notice the hole at all, but it is there, under the grief, under the bones, under the music. The air nomads should have been able to escape, and the show never tells you why they could not. There is an additional dimension to this that fans have debated for years, and it has to do with the air nomads' nature as a people. The air nomads are presented as pacifists. They are monks, they meditate, they value all life, they do not eat meat. Their culture is built around detachment, spiritual growth, and the avoidance of conflict. And this pacifism, the show implies, is why they were vulnerable. They were not warriors. They did not build armies. They did not prepare for invasions because their entire philosophy was oriented away from the expectation of violence. But this explanation only works if you assume that pacifism equals helplessness, and the show itself contradicts this assumption repeatedly. Monk Gyatso, Aang's mentor, was a pacifist. He was also an airbending master, and when the Fire Nation came, Gyatso fought. He fought so effectively that his skeleton was found surrounded by the bodies of dozens of Fire Nation soldiers. A pacifist monk, alone, killed more enemy combatants than most trained military officers manage in an entire career. And Gyatso was not unique. Every adult air nomad was an airbender. Every single one. Unlike the other nations where bending is a talent possessed by some but not all, every air nomad could bend. The Air Nation was, on a per capita basis, the most powerful bending nation in the world. An entire civilization of benders living in the most defensible locations on the planet, with the most mobile form of transportation available, led by masters who could individually defeat dozens of comet-enhanced firebenders. That is not a population that gets wiped out in a surprise attack. That is a population that scatters, that fights, that survives in pockets, in hiding places, in the mountains and forests and remote islands of a world that is far too large for any military to control completely. The show needs every airbender dead. It achieves this by never explaining how. There is a fan theory, widely circulated but never confirmed by the creators, that Sozin used a strategy more sophisticated than a direct assault, that he invited the air nomads to a gathering, a peace conference, or a spiritual ceremony, something that would draw them from their temples and concentrate them in a location where they could be surrounded. That the comet attack was not aimed at the temples, but at the gathering point. This theory has a certain elegance to it, because it explains how a mobile population was caught stationary, and it adds a layer of betrayal that deepens the horror of the genocide. But it is a fan creation, not a textual fact, and the show itself provides no support for it. What the show does provide is Aang. Aang survived because he was not there. He ran away the night before the attack. He was caught in a storm, triggered the Avatar state, and froze himself in an iceberg for 100 years. His survival is explained, but his survival also raises the question that undermines the genocide's totality. If one boy survived by simply not being at the temple, why did no one else survive by the same mechanism? In a civilization of nomads, of people whose entire lifestyle revolved around travel and movement, the idea that every single member happened to be at one of 4 fixed locations on the same day strains credibility beyond what the narrative can support. The second of these fractures lives inside the walls of Ba Sing Se, in the underground tunnels beneath Lake Laogai, where a boy named Jet dies in the most frustrating way a character can die in a television show. He dies ambiguously. Jet is introduced in Season 1 as a charismatic freedom fighter, a teenage rebel leading a band of orphans in the forests of the Earth Kingdom, waging guerrilla war against the Fire Nation. He is charming and dangerous and morally complicated in a way that the show handles with surprising nuance for a children's program. Jet is willing to flood an entire village of innocent Earth Kingdom civilians to destroy a Fire Nation outpost. He is willing to sacrifice the many to hurt the few. He is, in the language of moral philosophy, a consequentialist without boundaries, and the show does not flinch from showing why that is terrifying. Jet reappears in Season 2, in Ba Sing Se, where he has been brainwashed by the Dai Li, the secret police of the Earth Kingdom. Using a technique that involves a dark room, a spinning lantern, and the repeated phrase "there is no war in Ba Sing Se." The brainwashing is disturbing in a way that goes beyond what you expect from Nickelodeon. It is not cartoon mind control. It is a systematic dismantling of a person's identity, a forced rewriting of memory and belief that leaves Jet confused, docile, and controllable. When the brainwashing is broken, when Jet remembers who he is and what the Dai Li did to him, he turns against Long Feng, the head of the Dai Li, and attacks. Long Feng strikes Jet with a boulder, a direct hit to the chest. Jet falls. And the scene that follows is one of the most debated in the entire series, because the show does not tell you what happens next. Katara kneels beside Jet and tries to heal him with waterbending. Jet tells the group to go, to leave him, that he will be fine. And as they turn to leave, Toph says quietly, "He's lying. She can feel his heartbeat. She knows he is dying." The group leaves. The camera lingers on Jet, alone on the floor of the tunnel. And then the scene ends. That is it. That is the death of Jet, except the show never confirms it is a death. Jet never dies on screen. No character ever refers to his death afterward. No one mourns him. No one mentions him at all in Season 3. Except during the Ember Island Players, the meta-theatrical episode where the characters watch a play based on their adventures, and the actor playing Jet dies dramatically on stage, prompting Zuko to whisper, "Did Jet just die?" and Sokka to respond, "You know, it was really unclear." That line is the show's creators acknowledging the problem. They know. They know they left one of their most complex characters in narrative limbo. Neither alive nor dead, neither resolved nor ongoing. And the reason they did this was not creative. It was institutional. Nickelodeon would not allow the explicit on-screen death of a child character. The network's standards and practices department drew a line that the show's writers could not cross. And the result is a scene that is emotionally powerful in the moment, but narratively broken in retrospect. Because stories have contracts with their audiences. And one of those contracts is that important characters get clear endings. You can kill a character, you can spare a character. What you cannot do, not without breaking something, is leave a character in a state of quantum mortality where they are simultaneously dead and not dead depending on which production document you consult. The show's creators later confirmed that Jet is dead. They said so in commentary tracks, in interviews, in the Avatar extras that appeared on DVD releases. But this confirmation exists outside the text. Inside the show itself, inside the four walls of the narrative, Jet's fate is unresolved. And that absence creates a ripple effect. If Jet is dead, why does no one mourn him? If Jet is dead, why does Katara, who is shown trying to heal him, never express guilt or sadness about failing to save him? If Jet is dead, why does his death carry no narrative weight in the episodes that follow? No consequence? No resonance? No acknowledgement that a young man who fought and suffered and was brainwashed and tried to do the right thing in the end was killed and left on the floor of a tunnel and forgotten? The answer is that the show was not allowed to treat his death as a death. It was not allowed to show the grief because showing the grief would require acknowledging the death, and acknowledging the death was exactly what the network had forbidden. And so Jet exists in a narrative crack, a space between what the show wanted to say and what the show was permitted to say, and the crack is wide enough to notice and narrow enough to ignore, which is the definition of a plot hole. And there is a deeper issue here that goes beyond Jet specifically. The show treats death inconsistently throughout its run. Zhao is pulled into the spirit world by a giant ocean spirit and never seen again. Yue transforms into the moon spirit, which is a form of death but is framed as transcendence. Combustion Man is blown off a cliff and presumably killed, but no one discusses it. The show exists in a strange moral space where war is real and violence is constant, but death is negotiable. Sometimes shown, sometimes implied, sometimes ignored entirely, depending on which character is dying and how close the standards and practices department was watching that week. And this inconsistency, this wobble in the show's relationship with its own mortality rules, is not a failure of the writers. It is a failure of the system. A system that asks creators to tell a story about a 100-year war and also asks them to pretend that no one in that war actually dies. But there is another angle on Jet's death that is worth considering, and it has nothing to do with network censorship. It has to do with the character himself and what his death, ambiguous as it is, represents within the show's moral framework. Jet is, in many ways, the cautionary tale of the series. He is what happens when righteous anger becomes its own justification. He is what happens when the desire to fight the oppressor leads you to become a different kind of oppressor. He is a teenager who lost his family to the Fire Nation and channeled that loss into a crusade that eventually led him to commit an act of terrorism, the flooding of a village. That would have killed innocent civilians if Aang and Katara had not intervened. He is, in the moral vocabulary of the show, a person who allowed his wound to define his weapon, and whose weapon grew larger than his cause. And his death, when it comes, is not a hero's death. It is not a sacrifice that saves the day. It is not a blaze of glory or a final stand, or a redemptive act that retroactively justifies his journey. Jet dies in a tunnel, fighting a bureaucrat, after being brainwashed by a system he did not understand, in a city that was not his, far from the forests where his story began. He dies confused and broken and alone. And his last words are a lie. "I will be fine," told to people who cannot help him. And the show does not honor his death, because the show was not allowed to acknowledge it. And the result is that Jet receives in death the same treatment he received in life. Abandonment, the same neglect, the same being left behind. That is either a profound thematic choice or a bureaucratic accident, and the fact that you cannot tell which one it is, the fact that the line between artistic intention and network interference is invisible in this case, is itself a kind of plot hole. A plot hole in the production, if not in the story. A crack not in the world of Avatar, but in the system that built it. And there is one more detail about Jet that deserves mention, because it connects to a larger pattern in the show. Jet's freedom fighters, the group of orphans he led in the forest, are never accounted for after Jet's death. Smellerby and Longshot are with him in the tunnels, and Longshot tells Smellerby to go, and they leave, and after that they appear briefly in the finale, fighting in the battle, but the show never addresses whether they learned of Jet's death, whether they mourned him, whether the loss of their leader affected their arc in any meaningful way. The show drops Jet and drops his people and moves on, and the moving on is the cruelest thing the show does to any character, because it is not even a deliberate cruelty. It is an oversight. An erasure. The show forgot about Jet, and in forgetting, it replicated exactly the kind of neglect that made Jet dangerous in the first place. And there is a final irony to Jet's story that connects it to the larger theme of this conversation. Jet's death is ambiguous because of forces outside the narrative, network censorship, production constraints, the real-world system that shapes what stories can and cannot say. And Jet himself was shaped by forces outside his control. The Fire Nation's invasion, the loss of his family, the structural violence that created the conditions for his radicalization. Jet is a character who was failed by systems, and his death is a narrative event that was failed by systems, and the symmetry between the two failures, the fictional and the real, is either the most sophisticated metatextual commentary the show ever produced, or the most depressing coincidence. Either way, Jet deserved better. Better than an ambiguous death in a tunnel. Better than being forgotten by the narrative that created him. Better than a joke in a meta-episode that acknowledges the ambiguity without resolving it. And the fact that he did not get better, the fact that the show's systemic limitations produce the same kind of abandonment that the fictional world's systemic failures produced, is a plot hole that extends beyond the text and into the production itself. A crack not in the story, but in the industry that told it. The third plot hole is the one that divides the fanbase most sharply, and it lives in the final 4 episodes of the series, in the space between the ocean and the sky, on the back of a creature that should not exist and yet somehow arrives at exactly the moment it is needed, the lion turtle. In the 4-part finale, Sozin's comet, Aang faces a moral crisis that the show has been building toward for 3 seasons. He must defeat Fire Lord Ozai. Everyone he trusts, every mentor and friend and ally, tells him the same thing. He must kill Ozai. It is the only way to end the war. It is the only way to ensure that the Fire Nation cannot rebuild its military under Ozai's leadership. And try again. Katara tells him. Sokka tells him. Even his past lives, the previous avatars whose wisdom he can access through meditation, tell him. Avatar Roku tells him that being merciful to Sozin was his greatest failure. Avatar Koshi tells him that she would have killed Shin the Conqueror without hesitation if he had not killed himself by refusing to move from a crumbling cliff. Avatar Karuk tells him that Aang must actively shape his own destiny. Avatar Yangchen, an air nomad, a fellow pacifist from the same culture that taught Aang that all life is sacred, tells him that the Avatar's duty to the world must come before his personal, spiritual needs. The show presents Aang's dilemma with unusual sophistication for a children's program. It does not make killing Ozai seem easy or appealing. It makes it seem necessary, in the way that difficult truths are necessary, and it shows Aang wrestling with a genuine moral contradiction. His culture teaches him that all life is sacred. His duty teaches him that this particular life must end, and the show gives him no easy answer. No mentor who says, actually there is another way. No loophole in the air nomad philosophy that permits killing under extreme circumstances. The moral trap is complete, and Aang is caught in it, and the audience is caught in it with him, and the tension is extraordinary. The show goes further than almost any children's program has ever gone by bringing Aang face to face with every philosophical tradition in his world, and having each one tell him the same thing. You must kill him. Avatar Roku, a Fire Nation avatar with personal experience of the consequences of mercy, tells Aang that his failure to stop Sozin was his greatest mistake. Avatar Kyoshi, an Earth Kingdom avatar known for her pragmatism, tells Aang that she would have killed Chin the Conqueror without hesitation. Avatar Karuk tells him that the Avatar must actively shape the world. And Avatar Yangchen, an air nomad, a fellow pacifist, the one past life who should understand Aang's reluctance better than any other, tells him to do it anyway. She tells him that the Avatar's duty to the world supersedes personal spiritual needs. Yang Chen's counsel is particularly devastating. She is an airbender. She shares Aang's culture, his values, his reverence for life. If anyone in the history of the Avatar cycle should understand Aang's moral crisis, it is Yang Chen. And Yang Chen tells him that pacifism is not enough. She tells him, in effect, that the culture he learned from the monks, the very foundation of his identity, cannot provide the answer he needs for the role he has been given. That being the Avatar requires a willingness to set aside who you are in service of what the world needs. That the genocide did not just take his people, it took the framework he relies on for moral guidance. He is, philosophically as well as literally, the last airbender, and his airbender philosophy is insufficient for the task before him. That is the show at its absolute best. A genuine moral impasse, presented without flinching, with no easy answers and no comfortable outs. And it is precisely because the show reaches this level of moral sophistication that the Lion Turtle's intervention feels so jarring. The show earned the dilemma. It did not earn the resolution. And then, a lion turtle appears. Aang, sleepwalking or spiritually guided, walks off the shore of an island and onto the back of a massive creature that turns out to be a lion turtle, one of the ancient beings that predate the Avatar cycle itself. The lion turtle speaks to Aang in a single cryptic sentence about the nature of bending, and then, without further elaboration, it touches Aang's forehead and chest and gives him the ability to energy bend, to reach inside another person and remove their bending entirely, without killing them, without violating the air nomad principle of the sanctity of life. A perfect solution to a perfect problem delivered at the last possible moment by a character who has never appeared in the show before. The lion turtle is, by almost any definition, a deus ex machina. It is a god from the machine, a solution that arrives from outside the narrative to resolve a conflict that the narrative itself could not resolve. The show spent 3 seasons establishing that Aang would have to kill Ozai, and in the final hours, it introduced a brand new power from a brand new character to ensure that he did not have to. And the problem with a deus ex machina is not that it produces a bad outcome. Aang's energy bending of Ozai is a beautiful scene, visually stunning, emotionally cathartic, thematically consistent with the show's emphasis on balance and mercy. The problem is that it was not earned. The solution was not built into the story. It was grafted onto it at the last minute, and the seams show. The show's defenders argue that the lion turtle was foreshadowed. There is a scene in the Wan Shi-tong's library episode where Aang looks at a drawing of a lion turtle. There is a reference to ancient creatures in the lore, and these are real, they are in the show, but foreshadowing a creature's existence is not the same as foreshadowing a power. The show established that lion turtles exist. It did not establish that they could give people new forms of bending. It did not establish that energy bending was possible. It did not give Aang any reason to seek out a lion turtle or any knowledge that such a creature could help him. The lion turtle found Aang. Aang did not find the lion turtle. And that direction of causality matters, because stories are about characters making choices. And Aang did not choose to find the lion turtle. He stumbled onto it in his sleep. There is also a structural problem that the deus ex machina creates, and it is more subtle than the narrative one. By giving Aang a way to defeat Ozai without killing him, the show retroactively undermines the moral weight of every scene where Aang struggled with the dilemma. If there was always a third option, if the universe was always going to provide a way out, then the struggle was not real. The anguish was not necessary. The past avatars who told Aang he had to kill Ozai were wrong, not because their reasoning was flawed, but because they did not know about a power that the show itself had not yet invented. And that is a strange position for a narrative to put its audience in, because it means that the climax of the story is resolved not by the protagonist's growth, or the antagonist's weakness, or the logic of the world the story is built, but by the introduction of a new rule at the moment the old rules became inconvenient. This is the plot hole that matters most, not because it breaks the show, the finale is still extraordinary, but because it reveals the one place where the show's ambition exceeded its ability to resolve itself. The show wanted Aang to stay true to his principles. It wanted him to defeat Ozai, and it could not figure out how to do both within the rules it had established. So it changed the rules. And changing the rules at the end of the game is the one thing a story is not supposed to do. There is a defense of the lion turtle that is worth taking seriously, because it touches on something important about how Avatar understands the relationship between the material world and the spiritual world. Throughout the series, the show establishes that the Avatar universe contains forces and beings that exist beyond the knowledge of its characters. The spirit world is vast. The ocean and moon spirits are ancient. Wan Shi-tong's library contains knowledge that no living person has accessed. Ko the Face Stealer has been collecting faces for millennia. The world is bigger than what the characters know, and the characters are frequently surprised by things that have existed since before their civilizations began. The lion turtle fits this pattern. It is old, older than the Avatar, older than bending as the characters understand it. In The Legend of Korra, which provides backstory for the first Avatar, lion turtles are revealed to be the original source of bending itself, massive creatures who gave humans the ability to bend elements so they could survive in the spirit wilds. The lion turtle that appears to Aang is not a random savior. It is one of the oldest beings in the universe, a creature that predates the entire system of bending that the show has spent 3 seasons exploring. Its knowledge of energy bending is not a new invention. It is an ancient power that was forgotten. This context makes the lion turtle more defensible within the show's cosmology, but the problem remains that this context is not available during the original series. The viewer watching Avatar: The Last Airbender in 2008 does not know about the Wan story, does not know that lion turtles were the source of bending, does not know that energy bending was the original form of bending before the 4 elements were separated. All the viewer knows is that a giant turtle appeared out of nowhere and gave the main character a power that solved his central moral dilemma. And no amount of retrospective world building can fully repair the structural damage of a solution that was not foreshadowed within its own text. The lion turtle also creates a philosophical problem that mirrors the structural one. The show's moral question, can Aang defeat Ozai without killing him, is presented as a genuine dilemma, a hard choice between 2 bad options. Kill Ozai and betray your principles, or spare Ozai and doom the world. The power of the dilemma depends on its intractability. It has to feel impossible. The audience has to believe that there is no third option, because the dramatic tension comes from watching Aang search for something that does not exist. When the third option arrives, it retroactively cheapens the search. Not because the option is bad, energy bending is elegant, beautiful, thematically resonant, but because the option was not discovered through Aang's own effort. It was given to him by a creature he did not seek out, through a mechanism he did not understand, in his sleep. And the passivity of that, the fact that the universe handed Aang his answer instead of making him earn it, is the real problem. Not the existence of energy bending, the delivery method. The story asked the hardest question it knew how to ask, and then the universe whispered the answer in the hero's ear while he was unconscious, and the hero woke up with the cheat code already installed. There is a version of the finale where this problem does not exist. A version where Aang discovers energy bending through his own research, perhaps in Wan Shi Tong's library, which has already been established as containing knowledge lost to the modern world. A version where the lion turtle is foreshadowed not just as a creature but as a source of ancient bending knowledge, perhaps through a conversation with Aira, who studied the Sun Warriors and who clearly knows things about the world's history that other characters do not. A version where Aang seeks out the lion turtle intentionally, guided by clues he has been collecting across the season, and earns the power through a trial or a test or a demonstration of worthiness. Any of these versions would solve the Deus Ex Machina problem while preserving the emotional payoff of energy bending. The fact that the show chose none of them, the fact that it opted for the simplest and most passive delivery method available, suggests that the writers ran out of time, that the finale's production schedule did not allow for the kind of setup that energy bending required, that the lion turtle was a patch, a solution to a problem the writers could not solve within the constraints they were working under. And the constraints were real. The finale was 4 episodes. Those 4 episodes had to resolve every major storyline in the show simultaneously. There was simply no room for a multi-episode setup of energy bending. And so the lion turtle appeared, and the solution appeared with it, and the show traded narrative coherence for emotional catharsis. It is a trade that most viewers are willing to accept. But it is still a trade. The 4th fracture in the show's logic involves a rock and a locked door, and a contradiction so fundamental that the show seems to hope you will be too emotionally overwhelmed to notice it. It involves Aang's chakra and the Avatar state. In the Season 2 finale, The Crossroads of Destiny, Aang faces Azula in the crystal catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se. He is losing. Azula is too powerful, too fast, too precise. And in desperation, Aang does what Guru Pathik taught him to do in the previous episode. He sits, he meditates, he begins to open his 7th chakra, the thought chakra, located at the crown of the head, which Guru Pathik told him was blocked by earthly attachment. To open it, Aang must let go of Katara. He must release his attachment to her in order to gain control of the Avatar state. The show dramatizes this beautifully. Aang enters a meditative vision. He sees a cosmic version of himself, glowing, rising, ascending toward full mastery of the Avatar state. His eyes glow. The power builds, the audience can feel it. This is the moment, this is Aang achieving what he has been working toward all season. And then Azula shoots him in the back with lightning. The lightning hits Aang while he is in the Avatar state. It kills him, literally kills him. His heart stops. Katara revives him using spirit water from the North Pole, but the damage is done, the 7th chakra is closed. The Avatar state is locked. Guru Pathik's entire teaching, the sequential opening of the 7 chakras through emotional and spiritual work, is undone in a flash of blue light. This creates a narrative problem that the show needs to solve before the finale, because Aang needs the Avatar state to defeat Ozai, and the show solves it in the most physically literal way imaginable. During the final battle with Ozai, Aang is thrown backward and his spine hits a pointed rock. The rock hits the exact spot on his back where Azula's lightning struck, and the impact, the physical impact of stone on scar tissue, reopens the chakra and restores the Avatar state. Think about what that means in terms of the show's own spiritual framework. Guru Pathik spent an entire episode teaching Aang that the chakras are open through emotional and spiritual work, through confronting your fears, through releasing your grief, through examining your shame and your guilt and your attachment. Each chakra required a specific form of internal reckoning. The 7th and final chakra required Aang to let go of his romantic attachment to Katara, which he was willing to do, which he was in the process of doing, when Azula interrupted. The show's own rules state that the chakras are spiritual gates that respond to spiritual keys. And then a rock opens the last one. A rock. A physical object impacting a physical body, a piece of the earth that happened to be shaped in the right way and positioned in the right place, and that Aang happened to be thrown against with enough force to hit the right nerve cluster or scar tissue or whatever the show is suggesting happened in that moment. The spiritual framework is abandoned in favor of a physical shortcut, and the shortcut works, and Aang enters the Avatar state with full control for the first time. And the audience cheers because the moment is exciting. And almost no one stops to ask, wait, did a rock just do what a guru could not? The generous reading is that Aang had already done the spiritual work, that his chakra was already open, or nearly open, and that Azula's lightning created a physical blockage on top of a spiritual achievement, and that the rock removed the physical blockage, allowing the spiritual opening to complete itself. This reading is plausible. It is consistent with the idea that the body and the spirit are connected, that physical trauma can create spiritual obstacles, and that resolving the physical trauma can release the spiritual one. But the show does not explain this. The show just shows a rock hitting a back and the Avatar state turning on, and the audience is left to construct the theology themselves. The less generous reading is that the show needed Aang to have the Avatar state for the final fight, and could not figure out how to reopen the chakra through legitimate spiritual means without spending screen time that the finale could not afford. And so it chose the fastest possible resolution, a lucky accident during combat, and hoped that the spectacle would carry the moment past the logic. And again, the spectacle does carry it. The moment when Aang's eyes glow and the music swells and the Avatar state activates is one of the most exhilarating moments in the series. But excitement is not the same as coherence, and the rock remains lodged in the show's spiritual logic like a splinter that you can feel but cannot see. There is a broader issue here that goes beyond the rock, and it has to do with how the show handles the Avatar state across its 3 seasons. The Avatar state is presented differently in almost every season. In Season 1, it is an uncontrollable defense mechanism that activates when Aang is in mortal danger, flooding him with the combined power of all past avatars but leaving him vulnerable because if he dies in the Avatar state, the cycle ends. In Season 2, it is a skill to be mastered through spiritual discipline, through the opening of chakras, through the controlled release of emotional blockages. In Season 3, it is a locked power that is reactivated through physical trauma and then wielded with full conscious control during the final battle. Each version serves the story's immediate needs. Season 1 needs the Avatar state to be scary, uncontrollable, a double-edged sword. Season 2 needs it to be a goal, something Aang is working toward, a skill tree with clear steps. Season 3 needs it to be available but earned, a power that returns at the right moment to provide the dramatic climax. But the 3 versions do not form a coherent whole. The spiritual framework of Season 2, the careful, methodical opening of chakras through emotional growth, is completely abandoned in Season 3. Aang does not revisit Guru Pathik. He does not meditate on his attachments. He does not do any spiritual work to reopen the 7th chakra. Instead, the show provides a physical shortcut and moves on. And the spiritual framework of Season 2 is itself inconsistent with Season 1, because Season 1's Avatar state activates automatically in response to danger, without any chakra opening, without any spiritual preparation, suggesting that the chakras are a control mechanism for an already existing power rather than the power source itself. The result is a power system that feels coherent within any individual season, but wobbles when you look at it across the full series. The rules shift to serve the plot. The mechanics are adapted to the dramatic needs of the moment. And this is not unusual for serialized television, especially serialized children's television, where each season is designed partly as a self-contained unit. But Avatar aspires to be more than ordinary children's television. It aspires to be a unified narrative with consistent internal logic. A story where the rules mean something, where the mechanics are not just window dressing but integral to the themes. And when the rules wobble, the themes wobble with them, and the show's extraordinary ambition is the thing that makes the wobble visible. There is also a character-level problem with the rock solution that is worth examining. Guru Pathik's teaching was, within the show's narrative, the most important spiritual lesson Aang received in the entire series. More important than anything Roku told him. More important than anything the monks taught him. Pathik's chakra system was the show's attempt to give Aang's spiritual development the same rigor and specificity that his bending training received. Each chakra corresponded to a specific emotional blockage. Each blockage had a specific resolution. The system was elegant, detailed, and deeply integrated into the show's understanding of personal growth. And then the show bypassed it with a rock. The message this sends, intentionally or not, is that spiritual growth can be shortcut by physical accident, that the careful, difficult internal work of confronting your fears, releasing your grief, and letting go of your attachments is ultimately less important than being in the right place at the right time during a fight. That is not a message the show intends to send. The show clearly values Aang's spiritual journey. The show clearly intends the chakra teaching to be meaningful. But The Rock says otherwise. The Rock says that all of that careful work can be replicated by a lucky impact, and that the universe, in its infinite wisdom, arranged for a pointed rock to be exactly where Aang's spine would hit it during a battle with the Fire Lord, and that this arrangement was more effective than months of meditation with a guru. If you are feeling generous, you can read The Rock as the universe's intervention, as the spiritual world responding to Aang's need by providing a physical catalyst for a spiritual unlocking that was already in progress. This reading preserves the value of Pathik's teaching while allowing the show to provide the dramatic moment it needs. But this reading requires a level of interpretive charity that the show does not earn, because the show does not signal that The Rock is a spiritual event. It shows it as a physical accident. Impact, flash, power, and the simplicity of that sequence, the purely mechanical cause and effect of it, undermines the entire spiritual framework that the show spent half a season building. Now, take a breath. We are halfway through. 5 down, 5 to go. And if you have been listening closely, you may have noticed that these plot holes share a common ancestry. They are all born from the same tension. The tension between a show that wants to tell a morally complex, internally consistent, adult-caliber story, and a production system that imposes constraints of time, audience age, network standards, and narrative efficiency. The show pushes against those constraints constantly. Sometimes it breaks through. Sometimes it does not. And the places where it does not break through are what we have been examining, one by one, like a geologist examining the stress fractures in a seemingly solid cliff face. The fifth plot hole is not a single moment but a pattern, and the pattern reveals something about the show's relationship with its own power system that becomes more uncomfortable the longer you look at it. It is the inconsistency of firebending's source. In seasons 1 and 2, firebending is presented as being powered by emotion, specifically by aggression, rage, and the desire to dominate. Iroh tells Zuko that firebending comes from the breath, and the breath comes from energy, and the energy comes from the drive within the bender. Zheng Zheng, the deserter firebender who briefly trains Aang in season 1, describes fire as a curse, a force of destruction that consumes everything it touches, and his entire teaching philosophy is about restraint, about controlling the destructive impulse that firebending feeds on. Zhao, the antagonist of season 1, is explicitly described as a powerful but undisciplined firebender whose rage makes him strong but also makes him reckless. And Azula, the most powerful firebender in the show, who is not the Fire Lord, is driven by a need for control and perfection that is indistinguishable from fury. The show establishes across 2 full seasons that firebending is the element of willpower, of aggression, of inner fire that burns hottest when the bender is angry or determined, or desperate. This is not subtext. It is text, characters say it explicitly, training sequences demonstrate it. The entire first season builds Zuko's firebending around his anger, his sense of injustice, his burning need to recapture the Avatar and restore his honor. His fire is fed by his fury. When he is calm, he is weaker. When he is enraged, he is dangerous. The correlation between emotional intensity and firebending power is presented as one of the show's foundational rules, as fundamental as the idea that water follows the moon or that Earth requires stability. Iroh reinforces this framework even while hinting at something beyond it. He tells Zuko that firebending comes from the breath, and the breath comes from the body's chi, and the chi comes from the bender's drive. He teaches breathing exercises. He emphasizes control, but the underlying model is still emotional. The fire comes from inside you. The hotter the emotion, the hotter the fire. This is why firebenders are presented as the most aggressive element. This is why the Fire Nation's military culture emphasizes strength, dominance, and the assertion of will. Their entire bending philosophy, as presented for 2 seasons, is built on the idea that power comes from intensity of feeling. Characters say it explicitly. Training sequences demonstrate it. The correlation between emotional intensity and firebending power is one of the show's foundational rules. And then Season 3 changes the rule. In the Firebending Masters, Aang and Zuko travel to the ruins of the Sun Warrior civilization to learn the true source of firebending. They discover that these Sun Warriors are not extinct, that they have been hiding in plain sight for centuries, and that they guard the last 2 surviving dragons, Ran and Shaw. Aang and Zuko perform a ritual for the dragons and receive a vision of fire that is not destructive, but beautiful. Fire as color, fire as energy, fire as life. Fire as the warmth that sustains rather than the heat that destroys. And both of them emerge from the experience with a new understanding of their element. Firebending does not come from rage. It comes from the sun, from life energy, from a source that is fundamentally creative rather than fundamentally destructive. This is a powerful and meaningful narrative development. It recontextualizes Iroh's entire character arc, explains why his firebending is warm rather than aggressive, and gives Aang a way to firebend without relying on anger, which contradicts his air nomad pacifism. Thematically, it is beautiful. Logically, it creates a problem. Because if the true source of firebending is life energy and the sun, then what has every other firebender in the show been doing for 2.5 seasons? Has every Fire Nation soldier been firebending wrong? Has the entire military structure of the Fire Nation, the most powerful fighting force in the world, been powered by a misunderstanding of its own element? Has Ozai, the Fire Lord, the most powerful firebender alive, been drawing from the wrong well his entire life? And if so, how is he still so powerful? If rage is the wrong source and life energy is the right source, and Ozai runs on rage, then Ozai should be weaker than a Sun Warrior who runs on life energy. But he is not. He is vastly more powerful than any Sun Warrior, vastly more powerful than anyone except a fully realized Avatar, and his power comes from exactly the source the show has now told you is inferior. The show does not address this contradiction. It introduces the new framework, applies it to Aang and Zuko, and then proceeds to the finale where Ozai, still running on rage and domination, demonstrates power levels that exceed anything the Sun Warriors could dream of. The implication is that rage-based firebending is not wrong, just incomplete, and that life energy-based firebending is not more powerful, just more balanced. But that is not what the show says. What the show says, through Zuko's dialogue, is that they have been taught wrong, that the Fire Nation has corrupted firebending, that the true source is something different and something better. And then the finale shows you that the corrupted version is stronger, which means either the corruption works, or the true source is a nice idea that does not hold up under combat conditions. And neither of those interpretations is what the show intended. The firebending source problem extends beyond Ozai into the show's treatment of lightning generation, which is supposed to be the highest form of firebending. Lightning, according to Iroh, is created by separating the positive and negative energies within the body and then allowing them to recombine. The process requires absolute emotional calm, peace of mind, a cold fire, if you will. This is consistent with the life energy model that the Sun Warriors represent. Lightning requires balance, stillness, the absence of emotion. But consider who can generate lightning in the show. Azula can. Azula, whose entire characterization is built on barely contained emotional turmoil, on perfectionism so extreme it eventually shatters her mind, on a need for control that is indistinguishable from panic. Azula is many things. Emotionally calm is not one of them. And yet, she generates lightning with more precision and frequency than any other character in the show. Her lightning is her signature weapon. She uses it in moments of rage, in moments of desperation, in the final Agni Kai against Zuko, when she is actively losing her mind, when she is crying and screaming and coming apart at the seams. She generates lightning while sobbing. She generates lightning while mentally disintegrating. And the show's own rules say that lightning requires inner peace. Iroh, the character who actually possesses inner peace, who has done the spiritual work, who has studied with the Sun Warriors and the dragons and the waterbenders, who has achieved the emotional balance that lightning supposedly requires, generates lightning exactly once in the entire series. Once, in a demonstration for Zuko, the man who embodies the correct approach to firebending uses the technique that requires that approach less frequently than the teenager who embodies the incorrect approach. Zuko cannot generate lightning at all during the series. Iroh explains that this is because Zuko has too much inner turmoil, too much unresolved emotional conflict. His shame and his anger prevent him from achieving the separation of energies. This is consistent with the rules. But if inner turmoil prevents lightning generation, then Azula should not be able to generate it either. Because Azula's inner turmoil is at least as severe as Zuko's, possibly more so. And the show's own finale demonstrates this when she breaks down completely. The explanation that fans have constructed, and that has some basis in the show, is that Azula's calm is a surface calm, a mask, a rigid control so absolute that it simulates peace even though the interior is chaos. She does not actually have inner peace. She has inner suppression. She pushes the turmoil down so completely that her body can perform the separation of energies, even though her mind is fracturing. This is a good explanation. It deepens Azula's character and adds a tragic dimension to her mastery. But it is an explanation that the show never offers. The show never explains why Azula can generate lightning despite lacking the emotional prerequisites. It simply shows her doing it and lets the audience reconcile the contradiction on their own. And this connects to a broader inconsistency in how the show treats bending specializations across all four elements. Metal bending, invented by Toph, is presented as a revolutionary breakthrough, something that no earthbender had ever achieved before. Toph accomplishes it by perceiving the impurities in refined metal, the tiny fragments of earth that remain after smelting, and bending those fragments to manipulate the metal around them. This is elegant. It follows the show's own logic. It does not require a rule change, it requires a creative application of existing rules. But compare metal bending's logical consistency to lava bending, which is introduced in Avatar: The Last Airbender as something only the Avatar can do because it requires bending both earth and fire simultaneously. Avatar Roku lava bends when he confronts Sozin during the volcanic eruption. The implication is clear. Lava is molten rock, and manipulating it requires control of both the earth component and the heat component. Only the Avatar, who can bend all four elements, and then the Legend of Korra introduces Gazan, an earthbender who can lava bend without any firebending ability. The explanation is that lava bending is a rare earthbending specialization like metal bending, and does not require firebending at all. But this directly contradicts the original show's implication. If earthbenders can manipulate lava without fire, then why was Roku's lava bending presented as an Avatar-only ability? If lava is just hot earth, then any earthbender with sufficient power should be able to manipulate it. But if lava requires understanding heat, then it is a cross-elemental skill that should require firebending knowledge. The franchise chose not to reconcile these positions. It simply introduced the new rule in the new show and expected the audience to update their understanding retroactively. And most viewers did, because Gazan is a compelling character and his lava-bending scenes are visually spectacular, and spectacle, as always, smooths over inconsistency. But the inconsistency remains, and it is part of a larger pattern where the bending system's rules are treated as firm within any single scene, but flexible across the franchise as a whole, bending to serve the needs of whichever story is being told at the moment. This is a pattern in Avatar that appears across multiple plot holes. The show establishes rules, and then it breaks the rules for dramatic effect, and the dramatic effect is always strong enough to carry the moment. And the rule violation only becomes visible in retrospect, when you step back and compare what the show said to what the show showed. The show said firebending comes from life energy. The show showed that rage-based firebending is more powerful. The show said lightning requires inner peace. The show showed Azula generating lightning while mentally collapsing. The individual moments are excellent. The system is inconsistent. The sixth of these fractures involves a single scene that lasts less than 2 minutes and reshapes the entire political structure of Ba Sing Se, in a way that the show treats as dramatic, but that, under examination, is deeply implausible. It is the moment when the Dai Li switch their allegiance from Long Feng to Azula. The Dai Li are the most feared organization in the Earth Kingdom. They are the secret police of Ba Sing Se, a city of millions, and they have maintained control over the population for generations through surveillance, brainwashing, and the systematic suppression of any information about the 100-Year War. They answer to Long Feng, the Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se, who has effectively ruled the city from the shadows, while the Earth King serves as a figurehead. Long Feng commands the Dai Li through a combination of institutional authority, personal power, and decades of cultivated loyalty. He built the organization, he trained its agents, he designed its methods. The Dai Li are not just his soldiers, they are his creation. Azula arrives in Ba Sing Se, having infiltrated the city in disguise with only 2 companions, Mai and Tai Li. She is 14 years old. She has no institutional authority in the Earth Kingdom. She has no history with the Dai Li. She has no leverage except her own personality and a brief demonstration of strategic thinking during the coup she orchestrates. And in a single confrontation, in a single speech, she takes the Dai Li from Longfeng. The scene plays as follows. Longfeng believes he is using Azula. He has agreed to cooperate with her temporarily, planning to betray her once the coup is complete and resume control of Ba Sing Se. Azula knows this, and when Longfeng makes his move, when he orders the Dai Li to arrest Azula, the Dai Li do not move. They stand still. They have already chosen. They choose Azula. Longfeng asks why. Azula looks at him and delivers one of the most quoted lines in the series. She tells him that he was never even a player. And then Longfeng kneels, and the Dai Li follow, and Ba Sing Se falls. It is a stunning dramatic moment. Azula's charisma, her confidence, her absolute certainty in her own superiority is so forceful that it bends the loyalty of an entire organization in real time. The scene is designed to show you how dangerous Azula is, how her true weapon is not firebending but psychology, not flame but fear. And it works as drama. It does not work as logic. The Dai Li are earthbenders. They are Earth Kingdom citizens. They have spent their entire careers maintaining Earth Kingdom control over Ba Sing Se. Their families live in the city. Their identities are built around their role as the protectors, or at least the controllers, of the Earth Kingdom capital. And they switch their allegiance to a Fire Nation princess, a member of the nation that has been waging a war of extermination against the Earth Kingdom for a century, because she gave a good speech. The show does not explore what happens to the Dai Li's families after they commit treason. It does not explore the psychological mechanics of how trained, experienced intelligence operatives, people whose entire profession is manipulation and control, allow themselves to be manipulated and controlled by a teenager from the enemy nation. It does not address the question of whether the Dai Li agents who switched have any motivation beyond being impressed by Azula's confidence, which is a thin basis for committing what is, by any standard, the most consequential act of treason in Earth Kingdom history. The most charitable reading is that the Dai Li recognized Longfeng's weakness and Azula's strength, and made a pragmatic calculation that Azula was the more dangerous person to cross. But pragmatic calculations involve consequences, and the show never shows those consequences. It never shows a Dai Li agent wrestling with the decision, doubting the choice, considering what it means to serve the enemy of everything they were trained to protect. They simply switch, like a light, and the show moves on. This is a plot hole born of narrative efficiency. The show needed Ba Sing Se to fall. It needed the fall to be Azula's doing. It needed the Dai Li to be the mechanism. And it did not have the screen time in a 20-minute episode to dramatize the complex, messy, psychologically plausible process by which a secret police force might actually switch its allegiance. So it compressed the process into a single scene and relied on Azula's characterization to carry the weight. And Azula's characterization does carry it in the moment. But afterward, when the adrenaline fades, the question lingers. 100 trained agents, a lifetime of loyalty. And a 14-year-old girl from the enemy nation said something intimidating, and that was enough. And now we move from the political to the astronomical, from the machinations of secret police to the mechanics of celestial bodies. Because the seventh plot hole is astronomical in both the literal and figurative sense. It is the one that science-minded viewers have been arguing about since 2008, and it is the one that casual viewers rarely notice, because the show's visual spectacle is so overwhelming that the underlying science becomes invisible. It is Sozin's Comet itself. The premise is straightforward. Sozin's Comet is a celestial body that passes close to the Earth every 100 years. And its proximity dramatically enhances firebending, giving firebenders power comparable to what waterbenders experience during a full moon, but orders of magnitude greater. Fire Lord Sozin used the comet's last pass to launch the genocide of the air nomads. Fire Lord Ozai plans to use its return to burn the Earth Kingdom to the ground. The comet is the show's ultimate power amplifier, the ticking clock that drives the final season's urgency, the reason Aang must master the elements and defeat Ozai before it arrives. The problem is that comets are made of ice and rock. A real comet is a frozen body composed primarily of water ice, frozen gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia, and rocky dust. When a comet approaches the sun, the heat causes the ice to sublimate, creating the distinctive tail that you can see from Earth. But the tail is not fire. The comet is not burning, it is evaporating. A comet, in real astronomical terms, is closer to a water-bending amplifier than a fire-bending one. It is a ball of ice melting in the sun. Now, Avatar: The Last Airbender is not a show that is obligated to follow real-world physics. It is a show with flying bison and spirit worlds and people who can bend the elements with martial arts movements. Demanding scientific accuracy from a world where the moon is a fish is missing the point. But the show invites the comparison by naming the object a comet, by making it a real celestial body that follows astronomical rules, by showing it in the sky as a burning streak of light, which is how comets appear from Earth, but which is not what comets are. The show takes a real thing, assigns it fictional properties, and then builds its entire climax around those properties, and the mismatch between what the show says the comet does and what a real comet is creates a dissonance that, once noticed, is difficult to unnotice. The more interesting question is why the show chose a comet at all. A solar event, a supernova, a magnetic storm? Any of these could have provided a fire-bending amplifier that made more intuitive sense. A comet-enhanced firestorm sounds right in the way that poetry sounds right, through rhythm and connotation rather than logic, and for most viewers, that is enough. The comet blazes across the sky, the music swells, the fire grows, and the physics become irrelevant. But for the viewers who cannot stop their brains from computing, who hear comet and think ice, who see the tail and think sublimation, the comet is a small crack in the show's internal consistency, a place where the rule of cool overrode the rule of coherence, and the show chose spectacle over sense. There is also a secondary problem with the comet that is less about physics and more about strategy. The comet amplifies all firebending, not just Ozai's firebending, not just the Fire Nation military's firebending, all of it, including Iroh's, including Zuko's, including Zhong's, including every firebender fighting against Ozai. The comet is a universal amplifier, and it amplifies both sides equally. Ozai's plan to use the comet to burn the Earth Kingdom makes sense only if you assume that the Fire Nation's firebenders outnumber and outclass any firebenders fighting for the other side, which is probably true in raw numbers, but the show's finale complicates this by having Iroh lead the Order of the White Lotus in the liberation of Ba Sing Se, where comet-enhanced firebending from the good guys is just as devastating as comet-enhanced firebending from the bad guys. Iroh single-handedly breaches the inner wall with a blast of fire that is described as one of the most powerful bending feats in the series. The comet made that possible. The same comet that was supposed to be Ozai's ultimate weapon was also the source of the Resistance's greatest military achievement. The comet does not pick side, it just amplifies, and a power that amplifies everyone equally is, by definition, not an advantage. There is one more wrinkle in the Sozin's comet problem that becomes apparent when you examine the timeline carefully. The comet comes every 100 years. Sozin used it to launch the genocide. Ozai plans to use it to burn the Earth Kingdom. In both cases, the comet is treated as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a brief window of extraordinary power that must be exploited because it will not come again for a century. But the comet was present for the entire duration of the Air Nomad genocide, which means it was present for hours, possibly days, depending on how close a comet passes and how long its effects last. The show never specifies the duration. During the finale, the comet's effects seem to last for at least several hours, long enough for multiple major battles to play out simultaneously across different locations. But the show does not tell you when the amplification begins or when it ends, and this ambiguity creates tactical problems. If the comet's effects last for a single day, then Ozai's plan to use it to burn the entire Earth Kingdom is absurd. The Earth Kingdom is massive. It spans an entire continent. You cannot burn a continent in a day, not even with comet-enhanced firebending. You would need weeks, months, an ongoing campaign of destruction that extends far beyond any plausible duration of a comet's passage. Ozai's fleet of airships shown raining fire down on the Wulong Forest is devastating locally, but the Earth Kingdom is not the Wulong Forest. The Earth Kingdom is a vast, diverse, geographically complex landmass with mountains and rivers and lakes and underground cities, and the idea that a fleet of 20 or 30 airships could burn it all during a single comet pass is a strategic fantasy that the show presents as a credible threat because the dramatic stakes require it. The counterargument is that Ozai was not trying to burn every square inch of the Earth Kingdom. He was trying to burn enough of it to break the Earth Kingdom's resistance permanently, to destroy the agricultural heartland and the population centers and the infrastructure that would allow any kind of organized resistance. This is more plausible and more historically resonant, echoing real-world strategies of total war. But the show does not frame it this way. The show frames Ozai's plan as the burning of the entire Earth Kingdom, and the characters respond to it as an existential threat. And the scale of the threat is what justifies the urgency of the finale. If you reduce the threat to something strategically reasonable, the urgency diminishes, and the dramatic engine loses power. But the airship fleet itself is worth examining as a plot hole within the comet plot hole, because the airships represent a level of technology that the show introduces in Season 3 without fully accounting for. The Fire Nation has been fighting a war for 100 years. During that time, they have developed tanks, steam-powered ships, and war balloons. These are significant technological achievements, but they are incremental extensions of existing principles, applied to military problems. Airships, however, represent a qualitative leap. They are massive, rigid-frame dirigibles capable of sustained flight, carrying crews of dozens or hundreds armed with firebending platforms and bomb bays. The show never explains when the airships were developed, or how. They appear in Season 3 as if they have always existed, but they were never mentioned in Seasons 1 or 2. No character references airship development. No scene shows the engineering process. No moment establishes that the Fire Nation was working on aerial military technology. The airships simply appear, fully formed, in large numbers, ready for the finale. This matters because the airships change the strategic calculus of the entire war. If the Fire Nation had airships capable of sustained flight and aerial bombardment, why did they need Sozin's Comet at all? Airships solve the Ba Sing Se problem without requiring comet-enhanced firebending. You fly over the wall that held for 600 days against Iroh's ground forces becomes irrelevant when you can simply fly above it. The airships also solve the Water Tribe problem. The Northern Water Tribe's ice fortress is impenetrable from the sea, but it is not impenetrable from the air. And the Air Nomad Genocide, the event that required Sozin's Comet and the element of surprise, becomes trivially easy if you have a fleet of airships that can reach mountaintop temples without climbing. The airships retroactively make the comet less necessary, which makes the comet's role in the finale less coherent, which makes Ozai's plan use the comet to enhance the airship's firebending capability, a belt and suspenders approach that is strategically redundant. He does not need both. The airships alone would be sufficient for a sustained bombing campaign. The comet alone would be sufficient for a single devastating strike. Using both is dramatically satisfying, but strategically incoherent. And the show's refusal to address the strategic implications of airship technology is one of its quieter plot holes, hidden behind the spectacle of the finale's action sequences. This is a common pattern in Avatar's plot holes. The show needs its big moments to feel world-endingly important, and to achieve that feeling, it sometimes inflates the stakes beyond what the show's own mechanics can support. The comet is terrifying because the show tells you it is terrifying. But when you examine what the comet actually does, what its effects actually mean in tactical and strategic terms, the terror diminishes. And what remains is a dramatic device that works because of its emotional weight rather than its logical consistency. There is one more thing worth saying about the comet before we move on, and it has to do with timing. The show establishes that the comet arrives at a specific, predictable time. It comes every 100 years. Its path is known. Its effects are documented. The Fire Nation has been preparing for this comet for a century. And yet, the show's heroes, the people who are supposed to prevent the Fire Nation from using the comet, do not learn about the comet's significance until relatively late in the series. The invasion plan, the Day of Black Sun, is developed as a counter to the comet threat, but it targets the eclipse rather than the comet itself. And when the invasion fails, the heroes are left with no plan for the comet at all, scrambling to figure out what to do in the weeks before it arrives. This raises a question about the world's institutions. The Order of the White Lotus has been operating for centuries. The Earth Kingdom has intelligence networks. The Water Tribes have spiritual leaders with deep knowledge of celestial events. Somebody, somewhere, should have been preparing for the comet's return for decades. An event that happens every 100 years is not a surprise. It is a known risk, and a world that knows the last comet enabled a genocide should have spent the intervening century building a defense against the next one. 100 years is an enormous amount of time. Enough time to develop anti-firebending tactics. Enough time to train specialized waterbenders who can suppress fire on a massive scale. Enough time to build underground shelters, fireproof structures, evacuation plans. Enough time to establish international cooperation specifically designed to counter a comet-enhanced firebending assault. The White Lotus existed throughout this period. Iroh was a member, Bumi was a member, Pakku was a member. These are some of the most powerful and knowledgeable individuals in the world, and they apparently did nothing to prepare for the comet until the final weeks before its arrival. The Order of the White Lotus's inaction is, in some ways, a bigger plot hole than the comet itself. Here is a secret society dedicated to the preservation of balance and the transcendence of national boundaries. Its members include masters from all 4 nations. It has been operating in the shadows for who knows how long. And when the comet arrives, their plan is to liberate Ba Sing Se. That is it. One city, One military operation. On a day when the Fire Nation's firebending is amplified to apocalyptic levels, the greatest secret society in the world commits its resources to a single city while the rest of the planet faces the flames. Where were they during the 100 Years of War? Where were they when the air nomads were being killed? Where were they when the Southern Water Tribe was being raided? Where were they when the Earth Kingdom was being conquered piece by piece? The Order of the White Lotus is introduced as a powerful, ancient, transnational organization, and its 100-year track record is one of complete inaction. They did nothing. They played pie show and drank tea and waited for the Avatar to return. And when the Avatar returned, they waited some more, until the very last possible moment, and then they liberated one city while a 12-year-old boy fought the Fire Lord alone. This is not how a responsible organization behaves. This is how a narrative device behaves. The White Lotus exists not as a functioning institution with a century of strategic thinking behind it, but as a dramatic convenience, a reserve army that appears in the finale to handle the subplot, while Aang handles the main plot. And the gap between what the White Lotus should have been given its description and what it actually was given its actions is one of the show's quieter and more frustrating inconsistencies. Instead, the defense falls to a group of teenagers who learn about the threat partway through their journey and improvise a response. The world's adults, with 100 years of warning, did nothing, and the show never asks why. The 8th of these 10 fractures touches something the show deliberately left unresolved, and in doing so, created one of the most discussed absences in the entire Avatar fandom. It is the question of what happened to Zuko's mother. Ursa, wife of Fire Lord Ozai, mother of Zuko and Azula, disappears from the royal palace on the night that Fire Lord Azulon dies. The show provides fragments of the story across multiple episodes, scattered like pieces of a puzzle that is missing its center. We know that Ozai petitioned Azulon to revoke Iroh's birthright after Lu Ten's death. We know that Azulon was furious and ordered Ozai to feel the same pain, implying he must sacrifice Zuko. We know that Ursa learned of this threat and took action. We know that, by morning, Azulon was dead and Ursa was gone. And we know that Ozai was crowned Fire Lord. The show ends without telling you what happened to Ursa. The last scene of the series has Zuko asking Ozai in prison where his mother is. Ozai stares at him, the camera cuts away, the question hangs in the air, and the credits roll. This is not exactly a plot hole. It is an unresolved storyline, which is a different kind of narrative problem. A plot hole is an internal contradiction, a moment where the story's own rules are broken. An unresolved storyline is a question the story raises and then refuses to answer. The distinction matters because the emotional effect is different. A plot hole makes you feel cheated. An unresolved storyline makes you feel incomplete. And the incompleteness of Ursa's story is, for many fans, the single most frustrating aspect of the entire series. The storyline was eventually resolved in the graphic novel The Search, published in 2013, which reveals that Ursa made a deal with Ozai. She created an odorless, untraceable poison and gave it to Ozai to use on Azulon. In exchange, Ozai let her live but banished her permanently from the palace and from her children's lives. Ursa returned to her hometown, had her memories altered by a spirit, received a new face, and started a new life under a different name. Zuko eventually found her, but this resolution exists in supplementary material. In the show itself, in the text that most viewers experience, the question is never answered, and the show raises the question deliberately, repeatedly, making it one of Zuko's central emotional drives. Where is my mother? What happened to my mother? The show treats this question as important. It devotes screen time to it. It makes Zuko's search for answers about his mother a recurring motif that humanizes him and drives his character development. And then it does not answer the question. It ends the series with the question still open. And regardless of what the comics later provided, the show itself is incomplete on this point. The question of whether this constitutes a plot hole depends on your definition of the term. If a plot hole is strictly an internal contradiction, then Ursa's disappearance is not one. The story is consistent. Nothing contradicts anything else. But if a plot hole includes unresolved narrative threads that the story itself flagged as important, then Ursa's disappearance is one of the largest in the series, because the show promised an answer and then did not deliver one, and the promise created an expectation that the ending violated. There is also a structural problem with how the show handles Ursa's disappearance that goes beyond the question of whether it is a plot hole. The show uses Ursa's absence as a character development tool for both Zuko and Azula. Zuko's memories of his mother are warm, gentle, loving. She protected him. She stood between him and Ozai's cruelty. She sang to him. She told him she loved him. Ursa is in Zuko's memory the good parent, the parent who cared. Azula's memories of Ursa are different. In the hallucination scene during the finale, Azula sees her mother in a mirror, and the phantom Ursa tells Azula that she loves her, and Azula rejects it. She screams at the hallucination. She smashes the mirror because Azula does not believe her mother loved her. Azula believes, or fears, that her mother saw something monstrous in her and loved Zuko more because Zuko was normal and Azula was not. The show uses this dynamic brilliantly. It uses Ursa's absence to explore how the same parent can be perceived completely differently by different children, how the same love can feel like warmth to one child and like judgment to another. But the brilliance of this dynamic is undermined by the fact that Ursa is never given the chance to speak for herself. She exists only through her children's memories and projections, and those memories and projections are unreliable, colored by trauma and time and the specific needs of each child's emotional narrative. By not resolving Ursa's story within the show, the creators left one of their most important female characters without agency, without resolution, without even the dignity of being confirmed, alive, or dead. Ursa is a narrative device rather than a character. She is a void that other characters project meaning onto, and while this void is dramatically effective, it is also a failure of the show's otherwise extraordinary commitment to treating its female characters as fully realized human beings. Katara has an arc, Toph has an arc, Azula has an arc, Suki has an arc. Ursa has an absence, and the absence, no matter how well it is used dramatically, is still an absence, and the show owes its audience, and owes Ursa, more than an absence. The fact that the search eventually provided an answer is relevant, but not sufficient because the show is the primary text, and the primary text should not outsource its most emotionally resonant mysteries to supplementary material published 7 years after the finale. That is not storytelling. That is damage control. And the damage, however well controlled, is still visible in the final scene of the show, when Zuko asks his question and the camera cuts away, and the audience sits in a silence that was supposed to be suspenseful, but has, over the years, become merely frustrating. And so Ursa remains, even now, even after the search, a character defined more by her absence than her presence. A mother remembered in fragments, a woman whose defining act, saving her son's life, cost her everything: her home, her children, her identity, her memories. There is a profound sadness in that, and the sadness is deepened by the fact that the show that created her chose not to tell her story within the time it had. Perhaps it could not. Perhaps 3 seasons were not enough. Perhaps the choice to end the series on the question rather than the answer was a deliberate artistic decision, a way of saying that some mysteries are more powerful unresolved, that the search itself is more meaningful than the finding. But the audience wanted the finding. The audience needed the finding. And the show gave them the question instead, and the question has lingered for nearly 2 decades in fan forums and video essays and late-night conversations, a wound that the search tried to close but could not quite heal. The 9th fracture involves blood, and Moonlight, and a power so disturbing that the show invented it, recoiled from it, and then, in its sequel series, broke its own rules about how it works. It is bloodbending. Bloodbending is introduced in Season 3 of Avatar: The Last Airbender in the episode The Puppet Master as a forbidden waterbending technique. The premise is simple and horrifying. The human body is roughly 60% water. A sufficiently powerful waterbender can reach inside a person's body and manipulate that water, controlling their movements like a puppet. The technique was invented by Hama, a southern water tribe waterbender who was imprisoned by the Fire Nation and developed bloodbending in captivity as a means of escape. She practiced on rats first, bending the tiny creatures' bodies in the dark of her cell, watching them move against their will, their legs walking when they wanted to stop, their heads turning when they wanted to look away. And then she practiced on the guards, human beings. People with names and families and lives outside the prison, people who walked down the corridor to bring her food and check her chains, and Hama reached inside them with her bending and made their bodies her instruments. She forced their hands to unlock her cell. She forced their legs to carry her to freedom. She walked out of a Fire Nation prison using the bodies of her captors as vehicles. And the horror of that image, the image of a person being driven like a cart, conscious and aware but unable to control their own muscles, is the most disturbing thing the show ever depicts. The show understands how disturbing it is. The episode is shot like a horror film. The lighting is dark, the music is tense. Katara's reaction when she realizes what Hama is doing, the revulsion and the fear and the dawning recognition that she, as a waterbender, could do this too, is one of the strongest performances in the series. The show treats bloodbending with the gravity it deserves, as a violation of the most fundamental human right, the right to control your own body. The show establishes a clear rule for bloodbending. It can only be performed during a full moon, when waterbending is at its most powerful. The enhanced power of the full moon provides the extra strength needed to overcome a human body's natural resistance to being bent from the inside. This is consistent with the show's established mechanics. Waterbending grows stronger at night, and strongest during the full moon. Bloodbending requires maximum power. Therefore, bloodbending requires the full moon. The logic is clean. The Legend of Korra breaks this rule. In Korra's first season, the antagonist Amon and his father Yakoni are revealed to be bloodbenders who can bend without the full moon. They can bloodbend during the day, in broad sunlight without any celestial assistance. Yakoni can bloodbend an entire courtroom simultaneously. Amon can bloodbend so precisely that he can sever the connection between a person's chi and their bending, permanently removing their ability to bend. The in-universe explanation is that Yakoni and Amon are prodigies, genetic outliers, waterbenders of such extraordinary natural talent that they can achieve what normally requires the full moon through sheer willpower and innate ability alone. This is not an unreasonable explanation. Every bending discipline has prodigies who can do things that ordinary benders cannot. Top can metal bend. Katara can bloodbend the first time she encounters the technique. Combustion Man can create explosions with his mind. The Avatar universe allows for exceptional individuals who break the normal rules. But the full moon rule for bloodbending was not presented as a soft guideline. It was presented as a hard limit. A law of nature, Hama explicitly states that bloodbending requires the full moon. Katara is forced to bloodbend during a full moon. Every instance of bloodbending in Avatar: The Last Airbender occurs during a full moon. The show builds a rule, reinforces the rule, and then its sequel series contradicts the rule, and the contradiction is explained retroactively as the rule was always more flexible than we thought, which is the narrative equivalent of changing the rules of chess after the game has started, because your opponent found a winning position. This is a franchise-level plot hole rather than a show-level one. Within Avatar: The Last Airbender alone, bloodbending is consistent. The full moon rule holds. The problem only emerges when you include The Legend of Korra in the continuity, which the creators clearly intend, since Korra is a direct sequel set in the same universe with some of the same characters. And when you include Korra, the blood moon rule goes from an absolute to a suggestion, and the internal consistency of the bending system, one of the show's greatest achievements, develops a crack that runs all the way through. But even within Avatar: The Last Airbender alone, bloodbending raises questions that the show does not answer. The most important one is this. If a waterbender can control the water in a person's blood, why can they not control the water in a person's eyes, or saliva, or the fluid in their joints, or the moisture on their skin? Water is water. The human body is full of it. If bloodbending works by manipulating the water content of a human body, then the technique should be available in degrees. A waterbender should be able to dehydrate a person's skin without controlling their movements, should be able to freeze the moisture in someone's lungs, should be able to do 100 horrible things short of full puppetry that the show never addresses because addressing them would turn a children's show into body horror. The show sidesteps this by treating bloodbending as a binary. Either you can do it or you cannot. Either the full moon is up or it is not. There is no spectrum. No partial bloodbending, no minor manipulation of body water that a talented waterbender might achieve under normal conditions. The show draws a bright line around the technique, puts it behind the full moon gate, and trusts that the audience will not ask what else might be possible with the same underlying principle under different conditions. And then Korra asks exactly that question and opens a door that cannot be closed. If Yakoni can bloodbend without the moon, then the principle of waterbending body fluids is not moon-dependent. It is talent-dependent, and if it is talent-dependent, then the full moon is not a requirement. It is a crutch. It is training wheels. And any sufficiently talented waterbender, in any era, could theoretically develop the ability to control human bodies at will, without celestial assistance at any time of day or night. The implications of this are staggering and horrifying, and Korra explores some of them. Amon's ability to remove bending permanently, Yakoni's ability to control an entire courtroom, but the full implications are too dark for either show to engage with completely. What bloodbending reveals, when you follow the logic to its conclusion, is that waterbending is the most dangerous bending discipline by a considerable margin. Not firebending, not earthbending with its lava-bending subset. Waterbending, the element associated with healing, with the moon, with the gentle push and pull of the tides. Because waterbending is the only discipline that can directly control the human body from the inside. Firebending can burn you, earthbending can crush you, airbending can suffocate you, but only waterbending can reach inside your body and make it move against your will. Only waterbending can turn a person into a puppet. And the show's treatment of this power, its introduction as a forbidden technique used only under specific celestial conditions, followed by its expansion in the sequel into a power that can be used anytime by the right person, represents a fundamental destabilization of the bending power hierarchy that neither show fully reckons with. There is also a question of consent and ethics that the show raises and then drops. When Katara is forced to bloodbend for the first time, she is horrified. She swears never to do it again. The technique is presented as a violation not just of the victim's body, but of the bender's soul. Using another person's body against their will is, in the show's moral framework, one of the worst things a bender can do. It is a corruption of waterbending's healing nature. It is the dark mirror of everything the water tribes stand for. And then Katara uses bloodbending again. In Season 3, in The Southern Raiders, she uses it on the man she believes murdered her mother. She grabs his body with her bending and forces him to the ground, and the scene is shot to make you understand that this is a line being crossed, that Katara is in danger of becoming something she does not want to be. But the show does not follow up on this. Katara does not face consequences for using bloodbending. No one confronts her about it. No one asks whether the emotional trauma of being forced to use a forbidden technique has affected her. The show treats bloodbending as a dramatic beat rather than a character development. And once the beat has landed, it moves on. This is the plot hole within the plot hole, not just the inconsistency of the rules, full moon or not full moon, but the inconsistency of the moral weight. The show says bloodbending is wrong. The show shows its hero doing it. The show does not explore the tension between those two facts. And the tension, unexplored, becomes a crack that widens every time you think about it. There is also a world-building question that bloodbending raises and that neither show fully addresses. If bloodbending is possible, if the water in the human body can be manipulated by a sufficiently powerful waterbender, then the water tribes have been sitting on the most dangerous weapon in the Avatar universe for their entire history. They are the only nation whose bending can directly control the human body, and this means that the power dynamics of the four nations are not what they appear to be. The show presents the Fire Nation as the aggressor, the most dangerous nation, the one that poses the greatest threat to global balance. But if the water tribes produced even a small number of bloodbenders, they would be, in terms of raw military potential, far more dangerous than the Fire Nation. A single bloodbender during a full moon could incapacitate an entire company of soldiers without physical contact. A group of bloodbenders could control a battlefield. An army with bloodbenders on a full moon night would be functionally invincible, because no amount of firebending or earthbending or airbending can counter the manipulation of your own body from the inside. The show needs the Fire Nation to be the threat. The show needs waterbending to be the gentle, healing, moon-associated element that serves as firebending's natural opposite. And so, the show introduces bloodbending as a forbidden technique, locks it behind the full moon gate, and treats it as an aberration rather than a logical extension of waterbending's capabilities. But the logic is there. Once you have established that waterbenders can bend the water in the human body, the full moon restriction is the only thing preventing waterbending from being the most destructive force in the Avatar universe. Remove the restriction, as Korra does with Yukon and Amon, and the power hierarchy collapses. And the show, having collapsed it, never rebuilds it. Never explains why bloodbending does not change everything. Never addresses the strategic implications of a bending technique that makes every other form of bending irrelevant. The 10th and final fracture is not a single plot hole, but a philosophical one, and it sits at the heart of the show like a question the show cannot quite bring itself to ask. It is the question of the Avatar cycle itself, and whether the show's central premise, the idea that balance is maintained by one person who can bend all four elements, makes any sense at all. The Avatar is the most powerful being in the world. The Avatar can bend all four elements, access the knowledge of thousands of past lives, enter a state of transcendent power that makes them functionally invincible, and communicate with the spirit world in ways that no other human can. The Avatar is, by design, the fulcrum of global balance, the person whose existence prevents any one nation from dominating the others. Without the Avatar, balance is maintained. Except it is not. The 100-Year War happened because the Avatar was absent. Aang froze himself in an iceberg for a century, and during that century, the Fire Nation launched a genocide, conquered most of the Earth Kingdom, and nearly achieved total global domination. The Avatar was supposed to prevent this. The Avatar is the check on power, the counterweight, the immune system of the world. And the Avatar failed not through malice or incompetence, but through absence. A 12-year-old boy panicked during a storm and triggered a self-preservation mechanism that removed him from the world for 100 years. And 100 years of war, suffering, genocide, and imperial expansion followed. This raises a question that the show never directly addresses. If the world's balance depends on a single person, and that single person can be removed by accident, by assassination, by illness, by simply running away, then the system is fundamentally fragile. It is a single point of failure. If the avatar dies in the avatar state, the cycle ends permanently, and the world has no avatar ever again. This nearly happened in Season 2, when Azula shot Aang with lightning while he was in the avatar state. If Katara had not had spirit water, if she had been 10 seconds slower, the entire avatar lineage, going back 10,000 years, would have ended. The entire balance of the world would have been permanently destroyed because one teenage girl was a good shot. A system that can be broken by a single well-aimed lightning bolt is not a robust system. It is a fragile one, and the show's universe seems designed to acknowledge this fragility without examining it. The Avatar is powerful, yes, but the Avatar is also mortal, fallible, emotional, and young. Every Avatar begins as a child. Every Avatar must grow up, learn the elements, make mistakes, and hopefully mature into the role before the world needs them most. And during the years between the death of one Avatar and the maturity of the next, there is a gap, a window of vulnerability, a period when the world has no protector except the institutions and alliances that the previous Avatar built. And as the 100-Year War proves, those institutions can crumble in a single generation. The Legend of Korra takes this further by having Korra lose her connection to all past avatars, severing the chain of reincarnation and making her effectively the first avatar in a new cycle. This means every new avatar after Korra will have fewer past lives to draw on, less accumulated wisdom, less spiritual depth. The system is not just fragile, it is degrading. Each catastrophic event makes the next avatar weaker, not in bending power but in the experiential knowledge that the avatar draws on to make wise decisions. And the show presents this as a loss but does not ask the deeper question, which is whether a system that degrades under stress is a system worth preserving, or whether the world should have developed a backup plan sometime during the last 10,000 years. This is the plot hole that is not a plot hole. It is a philosophical premise that the show accepts without question, the way you accept gravity or the speed of light. Because questioning it would unravel the entire narrative. If the Avatar system is flawed, if one person should not be responsible for the balance of the entire world, then the show's central mission, train the Avatar, save the world, is built on a foundation that the show itself should be questioning. And it does not question it, it accepts the Avatar as the solution, and asks only how the Avatar should fulfill the role, not whether the role should exist. And perhaps that is the deepest plot hole of all. Not a crack in the logic of the story, but a crack in the logic of the world. The belief that one person can save everyone. That balance depends on a single chosen individual rather than on the collective effort of millions of ordinary people working together. The Avatar is a beautiful idea, but it is also a fragile one. And the fragility is the point, even if the show never quite says so, because the fragility is what makes the story matter. A world where balance is guaranteed is a world where stories are unnecessary. A world where balance depends on a 12-year-old boy with the weight of 10,000 lives on his shoulders is a world where every choice, every mistake, every moment of doubt and fear and growth carries the weight of the entire world. And there is something else about the Avatar system that the show acknowledges, but never critically examines. The Avatar is always born into one of the four nations. The Avatar follows a cycle: water, earth, fire, air. This means that each nation takes turns having the most powerful person in the world born as one of their own. And this creates a structural inequality that the show never addresses. When the Avatar is born into the Water Tribe, the Water Tribe has a native-born protector who shares their culture, understands their values, and has a natural alignment with their interests. When the Avatar is born into the Fire Nation has that same advantage. But what about the nations that are between cycles? What about the air nomads during the era of a Water Tribe avatar? What about the Earth Kingdom during the era of a Fire Nation avatar? The system assumes that the avatar will be neutral, will serve the world rather than their nation. But the avatar is a person with a childhood, a family, a culture, a set of loyalties that are formed before they even learn they are the avatar. Aang is an air nomad first and the avatar second. His pacifism comes from air nomad culture. His vegetarianism comes from air nomad culture. His discomfort with killing comes from air nomad culture. These are not avatar qualities. They are cultural qualities that Aang brought to the role. And this means that the avatar's approach to balance is always culturally inflected. An Earth Kingdom avatar might be more willing to use force. A Fire Nation avatar might be more comfortable with direct confrontation. A Water Tribe avatar might prioritize community over individual action. The avatar is not a neutral arbiter. The avatar is a culturally specific person trying to serve a universal role, and the gap between the specific and the universal is a space where bias can operate, where the avatar's cultural assumptions can influence decisions that affect all four nations. The show's own history supports this. Avatar Kyoshi, an Earth Kingdom avatar, created the Dai Li, the secret police force that eventually became one of the most oppressive institutions in the Earth Kingdom. She created it with good intentions, to protect the Earth King and maintain order. But the creation of a secret police force is a very Earth Kingdom solution. It reflects Earth Kingdom values of stability, order, and hierarchical control. Would a Water Tribe avatar have created a secret police force? Would an air nomad avatar? The answer is probably not, because the solution was shaped by the cultural context of the avatar who devised it, and that cultural shaping had consequences that lasted centuries after Koshi's death. Roku, a Fire Nation avatar, failed to stop Sozin's imperial ambitions because Sozin was his childhood friend. Roku let personal loyalty, a Fire Nation cultural value, a value deeply tied to the concepts of honor and bond that define Fire Nation relationships, override his duty as avatar. He confronted Sozin, he warned him, but he did not stop him. He could have killed Sozin. He chose not to, and that choice, that culturally inflected, personally motivated choice, led directly to the 100-Year War and the genocide of the air nomads. The avatar system does not account for this. It does not have checks on the avatar's cultural bias. It does not provide a council or an advisory body or a constitutional framework that limits the avatar's personal influence on decisions of global importance. It just trusts that each avatar will figure it out, will transcend their cultural programming, will become something larger than their nation. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they do not. And when they do not, the consequences are catastrophic. And the system has no mechanism for correction except to wait for the next avatar, who will be born into a different culture and will bring a different set of biases. And the cycle continues. And the world lurches from one culturally specific interpretation of balance to another forever. And there is one final dimension to this plot hole that becomes visible only when you compare the avatar system to the real-world political systems it resembles. The avatar is, in political terms, a benevolent dictator, an unelected individual with supreme power, answerable to no one, operating outside any legal or constitutional framework, whose authority derives not from the consent of the governed, but from a cosmic inheritance that they did not choose and cannot refuse. The avatar can topple governments, defeat armies, reshape landscapes, and impose their will on nations, and the only check on their power is their own conscience. The show presents this as a good thing. The avatar is good. The avatar uses power wisely, or at least tries to. The avatar seeks balance, and for the most part, within the show, this works. Aang is a good person. He uses his power to end a war and restore peace. His intentions are noble. His actions are justified by the results. But the system that produces Aang also produced Kuruk, an avatar who by some accounts was negligent in his duties, spending more time surfing and partying than maintaining balance. The system produced Koshi, who created a secret police force and was comfortable with collateral damage in the pursuit of order. The system cannot guarantee that every avatar will be wise, or kind, or even competent, and there is no mechanism for removal, no impeachment, no election, no recall. If the avatar is wrong, if the avatar makes a catastrophic mistake, if the avatar's cultural bias leads them to favor one nation over another, the world has no recourse except to wait for that avatar to die and hope the next one is better. In a world with 4 distinct nations, each with different values, cultures, and political systems, the idea that one person from one nation can serve as the neutral arbiter of global balance is an extraordinary claim. It is a claim that requires not just individual excellence, but superhuman impartiality. And the show's own history demonstrates that this level of impartiality is not reliably achieved. The avatar system works when it works. When it does not work, the consequences include genocide, century-long wars, and the near extinction of entire cultures. The show does not present this as a problem. It presents it as the natural order. The avatar exists. The avatar maintains balance. This is how the world works. But buried in the show's own narrative, in its own history, in its own examples of avatars who failed, is the evidence that the system is not natural at all. It is a design, and like all designs, it has weaknesses. And the greatest weakness of the avatar system is the one the show can never acknowledge, because acknowledging it would undermine the very premise of the story. The weakness is the assumption that one person, no matter how powerful, no matter how well-intentioned, can be trusted with the fate of the entire world. That assumption is the foundation of the avatar. It is also the foundation of the avatar's deepest plot hole. Because every time the assumption fails, every time the Avatar is absent or biased or wrong, the world burns, and the world has no backup plan. And the show, which is the story of one Avatar's extraordinary success, never addresses the possibility that the next Avatar might not be so extraordinary, that the system might fail again, that the cycle might produce another Kuruk, another absence, another century of war, and the world would be right back where it started, waiting for a child to grow up and save them, hoping that this time, this child, this Avatar, will be the one who gets it right. That is the most generous reading of the Avatar system's plot hole, and it is also the most unsettling, because it suggests that the world of Avatar is not a world with a flawed system. It is a world with a system that is, by its very nature, a gamble. A cosmic dice roll every few decades. And the show's happy ending, Aang's triumph, Ozai's defeat, the restoration of balance, is not the resolution of the gamble. It is one favorable outcome in a game that will be played again and again and again, with no guarantee of the result. This is not a plot hole in the traditional sense. It is a design flaw in the fictional world that the show presents as a feature rather than a bug. The Avatar system works, the show tells you. Balance is maintained, but the show's own evidence suggests otherwise. Balance is maintained sometimes by some Avatars. In other eras, the Avatar fails, and the world pays the price. And the price is always paid by the people who are least powerful. The civilians, the refugees, the children who grow up in a world shaped by decisions made by a single person who may or may not have been wise enough for the role. And that is worth lying awake for, or, if you prefer, worth falling asleep to. But before we close this conversation, there is something worth saying about plot holes in general, and about what they mean for a show like Avatar specifically. Because plot holes are not all equal. Some plot holes are failures of attention, moments where the writers simply forgot what they had established or did not check their own continuity Bible. These are the kind you find in every long-running show. The character who is left-handed in episode 3 and right-handed in episode 12, the geography that shifts between seasons, the minor detail that contradicts a minor detail, and neither of them matters to anyone except the person maintaining the fan wiki. Avatar has some of these. Aang's eye color changes in the finale. Iroh's drawing of the Four Nation symbols has grass that appears and disappears between shots. The map of the Four Nations does not always agree with the distances characters travel. These are trivial. They do not affect the story. They do not change how you understand the characters. They are the kind of errors that every production makes, and they deserve to be noted and then set aside. But the plot holes we have been discussing tonight are not that kind. They are structural. They touch the show's core mechanics, its bending system, its spiritual framework, its premise, and they exist not because the writers were careless. Every one of these plot holes is the scar left by a moment where the show tried to do something that television, particularly children's television, is not designed to do. It tried to build a consistent magical physics across 61 episodes. It tried to tell a war story on a children's network that would not acknowledge death. It tried to pose a genuine moral dilemma and resolve it in a way that was both dramatically satisfying and philosophically consistent. It tried to create a world so rich and so detailed that it could sustain years of fan scrutiny without breaking. And it nearly succeeded. That is the remarkable thing. It nearly pulled it off. The bending system is one of the most internally consistent magical systems in television history. The character arcs are among the best ever written for animation. The emotional depth is real, earned, and lasting. The world is so well constructed that 20 years of fan analysis have only found the 10 cracks we discussed tonight. And most of those cracks require careful attention to notice and genuine effort to articulate. A lesser show would have more plot holes and fewer people who cared about them. Avatar has remarkably few plot holes and millions of people who have thought deeply about each one. And that ratio, few flaws to many people who care, is itself the highest compliment you can pay a work of fiction. It means the show earned the scrutiny. It means the show built a world so convincing that its inconsistencies feel like betrayals rather than shrugs. It means the show mattered enough that its plot holes matter too. And there's a final thought that connects all 10 of these fractures. A thread that runs through the Air Nomad genocide, and Jet's death, and the Lion Turtle, and the Chakra Rock and Firebending source, and the Daily's betrayal and Sozin's icy comet, and Ursa's absence and Bloodbending's broken rules, and the Avatar system's fundamental fragility. The thread is this. Every one of these plot holes exists because the show cared more about emotional truth than mechanical consistency. Every one of them exists because, at the moment of the hole, the writers chose the version of the scene that felt right over the version that was right. They chose the version that made the audience feel something over the version that would survive logical analysis. They chose art over engineering. They chose to make you cry rather than make you nod. They chose to create moments that would live in your memory for 20 years over moments that would survive 20 minutes of logical analysis. And if that is a flaw, it is the kind of flaw that defines greatness. Because greatness is not the absence of error. Greatness is the presence of ambition so large that error becomes inevitable, and the ambition itself becomes more important than the errors it produces. Consider the alternative. Consider a version of Avatar that prioritized consistency over emotion. A version where the air nomad genocide was explained with a detailed military briefing, where Jet's death was shown explicitly, where the lion turtle was foreshadowed across 3 seasons, where the chakra was reopened through a properly structured meditation sequence, where Firebending's source was consistent from the first episode to the last, where the Dai Li's switch was dramatized over multiple episodes, where the comet was replaced with a scientifically plausible firebending amplifier, where Ursa's story was resolved in the show, where Bloodbending's rules were never changed, where the Avatar system was questioned and reformed. That version of Avatar would be more consistent. It would also be worse, because the show's power does not come from its consistency. It comes from its moments, from Aang's scream when he sees Gyatso's skeleton, from the silence between Zuko and Iroh in the prison, from the lightning in the crystal catacombs, from Azula's reflection shattering in the mirror, from the song under the tree. These moments are not logically perfect. They are emotionally perfect. And emotional perfection is what people remember, what people return to, what people fall asleep to 20 years later, in the dark, with the volume low and the world outside growing quiet. And that is not a defense. That is not a justification. A plot hole is still a plot hole, and a show that aspires to greatness should aspire to consistency. But it is an explanation. And it is an explanation that reveals something important about why Avatar endures, why it is still being discussed and analyzed and loved 20 years after it aired. The show endures not because it is perfect. It endures because it is beautiful, because it chose at every critical juncture to prioritize the feeling over the logic, the heart over the head, the human truth over the mechanical truth. And the human truth is what stays with you. The mechanical truth is what we discuss in videos like this one, late at night, when the analysis is a form of love and the criticism is a form of respect, and the plot holes are, in their own strange way, proof that the show was trying to do something that no show had done before and that very few shows have done since. The air nomad should have been able to escape. Zhao should have killed An. The lion turtle should have been foreshadowed. The rock should not have opened the chakra. Firebending's source should be consistent. The Dai Li should not have switched so easily. The comet should not power firebenders. Ursa's story should have been resolved. Bloodbending's rules should hold. The Avatar system should have a backup plan. All of these things are true, and the show is still extraordinary. And those two facts can coexist. The way a crack and a bowl can coexist, the way a flaw and a masterpiece can coexist, the way a question and an answer can coexist in the same silence. Late at night, when the only person still listening is you. And if you are still listening, if you are still here, drifting somewhere between analysis and sleep, between thinking and dreaming, then here is the last thought. Plot holes are not failures. They are fossils. They are the preserved remains of creative decisions made under pressure, of ambitions that exceeded resources, of stories that tried to be bigger than their containers. When you find a plot hole in a show you love, you are not finding evidence that the show is bad. You are finding evidence that the show is alive, that it was made by humans, that those humans cared deeply about what they were making, and sometimes, in the caring, in the pushing, in the reaching for something just beyond their grasp, they left a gap. And the gap is not a void. The gap is a space where the audience can enter, where interpretation can breathe, where the conversation continues long after the credits roll. Avatar: The Last Airbender ended in 2008. It is still being discussed in 2026. It is still being analyzed, still being argued about, still being loved. And the plot holes, the 10 fractures we examined tonight, are part of why. Because a perfect show does not need discussion. A perfect show is complete. It answers every question. It resolves every thread. It leaves no space for the audience to enter and no reason for the audience to return. A perfect show is finished. Avatar is not finished. Avatar is still being interpreted, still being debated, still generating conversations at 2 in the morning between people who care about it enough to look at its cracks and see not damage but invitation. And that is the best thing a story can be. Not perfect, inviting. If this conversation left you with something to think about, subscribing helps us keep making them. Thank you for staying. Sleep well. I will see you in the next one.